Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so it's 6:30, so we're just going to give everyone a few more minutes to come. It's the enrollments for this course has gone a bit out of control over the last few weeks, which is really encouraging. We thought we were going to have 13, but it has skyrocketed to 20. So as a result, we'll have two tutors helping you through this course, which will be myself, Juliet, and Lisa. So we will be the two tutors for this group. We're going to keep a lot of the sessions together with all of 20 of us in here, but there will be moments where we'll break out and we'll go into smaller groups to do activities or to discuss. There'll be moments during the week where either Lisa or myself will pop onto Slack, so you have a moment to jump on and ask us questions, and we'll share those times with you once we've locked them in a little bit later, probably on Slack after this. As per the agenda that I circulated a little bit earlier on Slack, we're going to spend today's session, which will go for about an hour, going over, I guess, what is design research methods and why it's applicable to you. And we'll go through the first brief, just in case there is any questions or any concerns about it or things that you need to be further clarified. At least we'll go through that with you. And just a reminder, that is due this Sunday, so it's rapidly approaching. Then I'm going to go through some graphic design tips, just particularly for those people that aren't used to poster design, because it is something a little bit tricky. It's not my favorite thing to do, but there are some things that you can do to make what you do communicate really clearly and get what you're hoping to do across and make the audience really excited about it. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to do an activity to get your research design juices moving. And this is when we're going to design into two groups. And I'll go with one group, the other group will have Lisa. We're toying with different ways of dividing the group up, but this week we're going to just do it randomly. And in future weeks, once we get to know you and you get to know us, and the stage of your project and the type of, and themes around your project, we might divide them differently. So is that clear for everyone? Nodding? Perfect. All right, so welcome to Design Research Methods. This is a really interesting course, even though that whole idea around design methodology can kind of come with some really negative or boring types of connotations. And I think that's because historically it's only ever been academics or scientists that have really taken on that burden of finding out new knowledge, and that idea that they're the ones that are the ones responsible for conducting research. And they become these experts in the field and they publish their results, and then practitioners are kind of, I guess, burdened with that idea of having to take on what the experts know and apply it themselves. But we know from a practitioner perspective that this actually doesn't work. And this out of touch academic generalization has actually become something of a throwaway comment. But what's really exciting about the way that research is getting conducted now is that it's taking that practice or that action knowledge that practitioners have and bringing it into more of an academic field and giving that, I guess, that academic kudos to the practitioners, which is where most of you sit, and that's particularly exciting. We're finding that many practitioners are now conducting their own research, and what we call this as research through practice. And then what's actually really interesting is that practitioners are finding that idea around research as a vital component to their practice in itself. When it comes to design and the idea of design research, it's something that's kind of becoming a little bit bastardized, and a lot of different disciplines are kind of jumping in, borrowing those types of techniques and applying it to their own discipline. And I'm sure you can all think of a million different examples of how this has happened. The one that kind of jumped on to me when I was preparing for this yesterday was that idea of kind of the smartphone, and that we know that just through this kind of invasive device that we carry around everywhere, that there's a whole multitude of design practices, including user experience, interactive design, that's applied in that. And that's whether we're actually just using something very simple of finding out where the closest petrol station is, or something a little bit more complicated of finding out how much milk is in our fridge, even when we're not in the home. So these types of innovations in contexts and methods and applications of design are calling for a new type of designer. And those ones that are actually able to take research methodology in a very constructive way and be able to articulate what they're doing and applying it. And so this is what we're hoping to do through this course. And the outcome of the transformation around being able to articulate what we do and apply it means that we're able to understand and perform and critique and position design within more of an interdisciplinary community of practice. We know that design needs to be more than just an aesthetic and material domain of concern. And this is very, very much relevant to that idea of design thinking, design strategy, and that whole idea around, I guess, systems applications. And through your different types of practices, you probably come up against that all the time, which is probably why you're here in the first place. But the question kind of stands is, how as designers can we be responsible researchers? How can we conduct design research properly? And instead of becoming someone that we haphazardly do, we need to develop a measured response to the problems through research, which is deliberate with its intention, and it contains an evaluative process and includes reflection on what has been done and its potential for future impact. And so for this course, when I was going through the notes and preparing for today, I was kind of reminded of my own process that I went through and go through consistently as a practitioner and as an academic. So it's a combination of your experience of being a designer, so that's you doing things, that idea around social ethnography, which is the looking, and then your reflective practice, which is that retrospective process. So all of this type of stuff that I quickly haphazardly kind of just threw at you then was I guess more eloquently and articulately explored through Marius's packages that he released. That was particularly the first one. The second one that hopefully you have made time to read really goes through some of the basic steps around the different types of basic methodologies that are available to you. What I'm really interested in this class, and the reason why I was really excited to teach it, is because anyone can go away with a textbook and find out all these types of different methodologies around interviews or surveys or all these different types of things. But I think what's really, really interesting, and what I'm interested in design research, is that we don't just take it and we apply it in a qualitative or quantitative type of fashion, but we do it in such a way that's unique to you as a practitioner, the space that you're looking at, which I think is really interesting, and then the way that those two types of merge in the time and the context that you're doing it. And so I'm really interested to see how you guys apply the design research areas that you're looking at, and learning a lot from you, because I think that that's where the innovation actually lies. All right, so I'm going to pass over to Lisa now to talk about the first assignment, which is due on Sunday.
Okay, hi. So the first assignment has 3 elements to it, but before I dive too much in it, it's very much, the first element is about yourself as a practitioner. The next 2 are really around your specific research projects. What would be really good for, I think, both Juliet and myself to understand is just what level of clarity you think you have about what it is you want to research. For some people, they may know exactly what they want to dive into. Other people might have kind of, well, I'm interested in this general field, but I don't know specifically what I want to inquire. Some people may not yet be at a point where they've kind of picked a specific field that they want to work in. I kind of use the analogy of Google Maps for this, the idea that you can zoom all the way out and you're looking at an entire continent, or you can zoom into city view and you can see that whole city. Or you can zoom into street view, where suddenly you have no sense of what the continent is anymore, but there's a great specific level of detail and clarity just to your location. So if I said, for an analogy, continent view is, I know something vaguely in emerging futures of design, but I don't really know what I want to research. That's kind of continent view. City view is, I know the field I want to work in, but I haven't really figured out what about that field I want to do, so I don't have specific questions. And the third one is, I have my specific questions, I know what I want to inquire. I call that street view. So perhaps show of hands if anyone still feels like they're at continent view, that they really are trying to figure it out. Okay, thanks, India. Stephen, you too, okay. And Steve and Stephen, okay. So there's a few people, and I know there's a couple of people for bandwidth reasons who probably have their cameras off at the moment. That's okay, perhaps pop on when I call you. So the next one is City View. people who kind of go, I know the domain that I want to inquire in, but I haven't landed my questions and I don't have that clarity. Definitely Karen and Michelle there. Okay, and then finally,
and Kim.
Sorry?
And Kim.
And Kim. Did I miss you, Kim? Where are you? Where's Kim? Oh, hi, Kim. Okay. And then if I go people who are at Street View, so you actually know what your research questions are, you're very clear about that, and it's just about how you pull it together now and actually do the thing. So who do we feel feels like they're at Street View? Ali, cool. And Priya, and I've got a couple of chats coming in here. From Lara, okay, he's having trouble with their microphone. 3 different cities, okay, fantastic. So not quite continent, but maybe country view. Excellent. Okay, and Catherine, who's at good. That gives us a good sense of perhaps where you are and how we help you kind of navigate through that throughout this unit. Rightio. If I might jump in now, has everyone had a chance to start to read the assessment task and start thinking about how they pull it together? I think I had an exchange with Marius about what some model documents might be for the planning, the second and third elements of it, which is great. So the first element is what's called a reflection on practice, and hilariously the example that is on Canvas was actually the one I did 4 or 5 years ago when I did this subject. So you can see very clearly that my background is not visual design, and I really could have used someone like Juliet to give me some tips. Because whilst the story it told was solid, the visual appeal was not high. The most important thing with that though is we're not assessing you on your poster design skills. That is the medium by which you're telling your story about your practice journey. The thing that matters is actually the journey. And what we encourage you to do there is kind of zoom into not your entire detailed specific journey, but what are the key aha moments or the key illustrative examples that hit that main point that tell us how you've got to your field of practice and why that is the thing that matters to you, because that really frames up what you then take into practice research, as Juliet was saying before. Practitioner-based research is, yes, sits in the theory of research and design, but actually sits really personally in your own practice. So that context matters. Okay. So, I've got a couple of people dropping in a bit late. So then I guess the thing that we ask there is to try and pick those key either aha moments or example moments. The other thing about is what I call 2.35. Sorry, Jim, is it? I might get you to just mute you for a moment there, because I think we're getting a bit of ambient noise. Okay. Right. So what we think of there in the 2.35, tell a story. I worked for about 15 years in tech sector, including international telecommunications. And I tell the story about how we actually lost a satellite in 2.35 centimetres. And if you think how big a satellite is, and I just love India's response there, thank you, and how small 2.35 centimetres is, that is because one party had done their calculations in metric and one party in empirical. And of course, 1 inch is 2.35 centimetres. Now, when you're at Earth, that is this big. However, when you're going out on that trajectory into outer space, by the time you got into the outer stratosphere, we could no longer find that satellite. It was just too far lost. That small little thing right now can set you on a whole other trajectory. And I know that there's been a few moments in my career when I look back on them, I go, that was one of those things that was a small little redirect or course correction, but that little shift has fundamentally taken me in a different direction. So that is another way to think about those key moments that in your journey have brought you to the place you are now. And then I said, the main thing there is it's going to be great having Juliet tell us how to put together a nice poster. The most important thing that matters there is the story that you're telling is the story of your practice. So that's what I really encourage you for that first element to focus in on. So the second element of it is the actual specific research questions that we work on. And now we are in the second half of this session going to do a breakout to help you nail those, particularly for those people who feel like they're at continent view or they're at city view and they haven't actually got down to street view yet. So we will help you get to that. But the idea is to get that specific area that you want to explore and then chunk it down into particular little questions that you want to understand within that domain. And this is really important. This is a 12-week research project you'll be going into. It's not a 3 or 4 year PhD. So, you know, part of the learning is to really pick a specific slice that you're going to dive into rather than trying to solve the entire big puzzle. And then the next step we have in there is what I call the jumping off point. So step 3, once you've kind of got your domain area, you've picked your city, now we've picked the neighbourhoods and we want to now go, okay, so for an example, for me, I'd say, well, my city would be Milan. I know my neighbourhood that I want to explore is Isola. Okay, what are the specific elements that I'm not going to map that entire neighbourhood are? It's actually where the street markets for the fresh produce pop up every Sunday. That's the specific question, the jumping off point. That we're going to get to, and that's when we talk about keywords and key points of inspiration or anchor text that you might reference back to. So we need you to kind of look at in that second element, getting to those 3 pieces: the general domain, the specific questions, and then the jumping off point into the research. And the third element is research plans, and we're actually asking you to choose plans. For people who know they want to research, quite often we kind of fall in love with our first idea and this is how I'm going to tackle it. And I apologise, I'm getting my internet connection is unstable. So if I'm bubbling in and out, please someone just raise a hand and I'll repeat myself. It's good timing. But the thing there is we want you to actually think of, there are lots of, you know, as in design, how might we? There are lots of different approaches you could actually be taking in this. So if you really don't know how you want to approach it, just throwing 2 pieces of spaghetti at the fridge is a good place to start. This is your first iteration of the plan. It's not the one that you're submitting for final assessment. This really is to get you entertaining the art of the possible in how you might go about conducting your research. So I will encourage you to really think about which different methodologies you use and also what research probes or angles that you might use. Who are the people, if you want to conduct this with humans, who are the people you might want to get to? Are there different groups of people that you might get a different perspective on that you hadn't considered valuable, but when I think of different versions of my plan, I suddenly introduce a different perspective and that can really enrich your thinking. So it's just about making sure at this stage that we kind of go broad on options, because in assessment task 3, we'll narrow that down into a research plan. Was there anything, while I've got everyone here, that's people wanted to ask specifically about the first assessment task? Yeah, India.
I was just going to ask, so I'm at content interview, and I think part of that is because I'm not really sure where to begin with topics, and I was wondering if maybe people could share what they've come up with so far, just so I can get a bit of an idea of where everyone's placed.
Yeah, is anyone who is either at City or Street View feeling like they'd want to share some of their process? Yep, okay. Right, are you up on mute now or do I need to unmute you? Yep, there we go, unmuted.
Yeah, I'm thinking about carrying on from the research that I done in leadership. So I was investigating resilience among design leaders in the public service, how they deal with the, I was thinking about in terms of the 3-body problem, really, you know, where things are always in total chaos, and how you actually manage to deal with that. What strategies do leaders, design leaders actually use? What works for them? And also how to perhaps transmit this to younger designers who are moving into the public service.
Okay.
Cool, thank you.
That's a really good domain question. So really for you, you just need to finally sort of phrase that as research questions. Has anyone else done leadership and felt like that gave them some clarity that they might want a pathway in? Because I'm aware that there might be some people who have not yet done leadership. I know for me, when I was going through the course, the work that I did in design leadership really helped shape what I wanted to then do in my research project. So Karen, was that you or was that Ali who had a hand up there?
I had my hand up. I did do leadership, and I looked at effective leadership behaviours of public leaders who lead public consultations. And then in context, we did quite a bit of looking at ethics. And so I'm probably at a city view in that, and I don't quite know how to write a research question around it, or whether or not I could do a research project around it, which is, I sort of want to look at how do people make ethical decisions in high risk environments that often involve multiple stakeholder groups. So, yeah.
That's a really good city view. So you've got a really clear domain landed there, but again, yeah, very coming through that we don't know the specific question. So chunking that down, that's a big problem that you're not going to be able to sort of answer in 12 weeks probably, but I think it's a really fertile space to pick one slice to dive into, and that might sort of open up future exploration post this thoughts as well, whether that's informal academia or just within your own practice. So we will actually have a chance in our activity to talk a little bit more about how we chunk them down, but thanks for sharing, Karen, and for Jim. Does that help give some examples? Do you feel like there's a little bit more clarity or still very grey?
Oh, I think Michelle had one as well.
Oh, Michelle, I'm sorry. Where's Michelle?
Michelle's here.
Oh, here we go.
So I think with mine, so I've had a bit of think about this. What I'm trying to understand better is moving forward, do websites for financial services still exist? As in, are they still useful? That's what I'm trying to get to. And I guess through my research and my city, I'm not quite sure if I'm at City View or whether I'm at Street View, or maybe whether I'm at Continent View still. But I'm trying to decipher whether it's the digital app experiences in financial services that are the thing moving forward, and whether websites become redundant as people move towards more app banking. That's the bit that I'm trying to prove or disprove, but I have to formulate my questions properly and understand what is the problem that I'm trying to seek an answer to.
Yeah, so I'd say you're probably from City View getting into neighbourhood view, but not quite.
Oh, okay. Excellent.
The whole field and a specific slice about that question about whether people want web or whether they want app and how they want to access this information. So it feels like you're actually kind of got a whole neighbourhood landed down. It's how that comes into the specific question now. So to me, that feels like you're actually getting, for this stage, a good level of clarity, even if it doesn't feel like that.
Well, mine I think is, or for me anyway, is interesting because I work in the industry, and this is an actual thing that is repeatedly coming up right now. So just with the 3 other units that I've done in MDF, I've tried to create case studies or pick ones that have sort of organically come up that I can actually basically do for free and not bill the organisation for, and just say, look, here's some free research and here's some free tactical and strategic solutions, take it or leave it. But I very much try and I guess for the purpose of this subject, I'm trying to do something really worthwhile that will is contextual for where I am, that will provide some sort of value.
Yeah, so context to your practice is really important. And as we go through it, we'll just kind of encourage you to remember how design kind of helps answer those questions. But it sounds like that's very much anchored in your journey as well, and how you've got to where you are. So that's probably a really good illustration of why the context in step 1 of this assessment task matters. Alrighty, so what I might do now is hand back to Juliet, who's going to talk through just some tips for actually how to design a poster that is easier to make sense of and easier to read than the example that is on Canvas that I did a few years ago from the non-design. I think they put that up so that non-visual designers would feel good about themselves.
We're going to apologise in advance for everything I say now. Okay, so I've just uploaded one of the posters to our chat. it's a screenshot 2020-01, whatever. Hopefully you can all get that. If you have that up on your screen, I will refer to it as I talk through the principles, and then hopefully you'll be able to relate to the bits and pieces that I'm talking about. And as Lisa said, it's really important that we keep in mind that it's not, you're not getting critiqued on being an amazing visual communicator here, but it is a fundamental part of our practice, being able to communicate clearly and efficiently. And of course, things want to look good. And it's part of, I guess, our DNA. Okay, so as I said beforehand, poster design is really tricky. And what you guys are charged with doing here is even trickier because there's a lot of information that needs to get included in this. It needs to come across. So the very basis of good graphic design is following those basic design principles. So for anyone that's kind of coming in really late into the design journey, the design principles are balance, proximity, alignment, repetition, contrast, and space. I'll pop onto Slack after this a whole bunch of URLs for people that might need to rehash some of these fundamentals, and as well as some references, as in book references, to help those non-graphic designers kind of kickstart themselves into this. So what we're really looking for in poster design specifically in terms of how you execute it is that we really want a strong hierarchy, you want a strong grid layout, and you want consistency and simplicity. So let's have a quick look at that screenshot poster that I shared with you. Now, it's super simple, probably so simple it's boring. So it's something that you probably need to think about, that this one actually has no visual language whatsoever. It's using lots and lots and lots of text. So how could you use imagery or other types of iconography in there to break that up, to make what you're trying to communicate easier to digest, and I guess gives an extra dimension of what you're trying to communicate. I personally really find it challenging with page furniture, which is those green lines that are sitting around the title. There's no use for them whatsoever. I have a colleague who calls them cockroach poo all over the paper. So think about what would happen if you were to actually remove that. What I really like about this poster is that you know exactly what the research question is. Their top left-hand corner, ban. So they've used hierarchy really well. But from there, things kind of go a little bit pear-shaped for them. They feel that they needed to explain what they wanted to achieve, like I guess flesh out the question. But for me, the question needs to be self-explanatory. And if it's not self-explanatory, then I think you need to do a little bit more research on it. I like the way that they've used a contrast in the green versus the black to highlight things that are important to them. I think that's a really interesting and simple technique that they've used. They've stuck to one font type all the way through, which is really good. And on a personal note, please don't use a serif, like a script font. I find them really challenging. So try to be as clear as possible, and simple is best. So this is probably like an Arial or a Helvetica type of font, which is what we call as a sans serif. So serif is those bits on a typeface, like a New Times Roman, you know, those bits on the end of the T's and the I's. So those are the serif bits, and when a sans serif font is a simplified version of that. Sans serif fonts always work best in text. So if you do happen to have large chunks of text like this one, use a sans serif. That's really, I guess, the critical point. What this poster does attempt to do is, I guess, engage with that 3-column type of, I guess, grid work. 3 columns is a really common type of thing to do, but for this type of poster, which is A3, those sections of text are actually really big. So if you were to print it out, it'd probably be quite hard to read this across. As a rule of thumb, each line should only have 50 to 75 characters, including spaces. So use that as a type of guide to figure out how many columns you should have. Down the bottom of this one, where she talks about the contemporary practice, the IDEO and the Children's Hospital, it all of a sudden just breaks through the grid. You can tell why the person did this is because they had so much text and they ran out of space, but it really does look like something that's last minute and could be, I guess, resolved some more. All right, bear with me for a second. I'm just going to find another one, and I'm going to share it with you. All right, here it comes.
Sorry to interrupt, Julia.
Yeah.
Just not really seeing the examples that where they're shared at.
In the chat, I've shared them. It's a screenshot thing. Has everyone else got it or not? Yeah, some of you have. It's shared to everyone. Handful of people have. Another one's coming through now. Oh, but it's 1.38 megs, so it's taking a moment, and my connection's being a bit silly. Stephen, have you opened up the chat on the right-hand side of your browser? Yeah. All right.
I think Marius also shared this same example in the Slack channel.
He did. That's where I got it from. So if you can't see it on the chat, perhaps just jump back into the Slack channel, and you'll be able to see it there. If you're on a phone, Michelle just mentioned that the chat is at the bottom, but no screen share is coming up. I'm not sharing my screen. It's just a screenshot. It's a file that I've uploaded to the chat. Has everyone? How are we going there? Stephen, any luck?
Just moving back over to the Slack since I'm not seeing it.
Okay.
I presume that's in the community thread or the community channel.
Yeah, it's a Be Methods community, and it was actually Marius has posted there in response to a question that Karen had asked.
And Karen's, yes, I had a look at those earlier.
So we'll just
Thank
look
you.
at the all text, no graphic version on healthcare industry. And what's the second one, Juliet? So it's taking a long time to come through because my bandwidth is dodgy.
That's right. The second one is how might storytelling improve community co-creation in early stage policy development?
That's the other one from the Slack channel. Perfect. So they're both there if people are having the same issue I'm having.
Right. So we're talking about two samples.
Two. So I just had a quick look at the one with the green text, and now we're going to talk about the second one. All right, I'll keep going. And if there's anything here that you'd like me to go over, I'll be on Slack on Friday, so we can re-jump into it then. All right, so with the second poster, how might storytelling improve community co-creation? This is a really interesting poster. They've used quite large text. The size of the font that you choose is obviously very applicable to the type of font that you use. Some fonts are bigger or smaller than others, so that's something to keep in mind. But I guess more to kind of keep in mind is actually the user and the audience that your poster will be speaking to. Chances are your poster is going to be marked digitally, so the size of the font needs to be quite easy to be read on the screen. But conversely, you don't want to use too big a font and not have space for all the information that you're trying to communicate. So with this particular type of poster, they've used hierarchy really well with this with the big question posted at the top. They've really jammed in a lot of their font, their type here, and there's not much, I guess, white space to let their eye kind of rest on anything. They've used quite a broad, as in wide type of font instead of, you could actually use a narrow one and actually get more text in. So think about the way the text obviously falls on the poster in that way. But instead of using a different color like the previous one did, they've used capitals to be able to see where, I guess, the things that are important to them, which is really interesting. But what was really great about this one, opposed to the last one, is that they've included some images, which is really great in order to, I guess, visualize what the types of projects that they're looking at. The pet hate for me on this one is the fade around it. If you're going to have a picture, let's make it big and bright and vibrant. Putting the fade around it is kind of a bit weird and feels a little bit dreamlike. And I'm not too sure if this is something that they're, thinking about in a different type of state. Conversely to this is that their explanation of why these projects are really interesting to them is really lacking. And I think that that's one of the things that you really need to think about. Pictures are great. An explanation of what the project is vital, but also being critical in that space and communicating that to the bits that's important to you. This is a really complex element of the poster design and something that you might feel that you don't actually have enough space for. So using a key or a legend and an iconography in that way could actually be a really interesting element for you to integrate into your posters. And I can provide some examples on Slack if you're interested in going down that way. Okay, so let me just jump back to my notes and make sure that we've got everything. Okay, so to recap, make sure that you're really clear on the types, on the audience that you're designing this for and how they're going to be reading it, which is obviously Lisa and I, and we'll be reading it on the screen. So make sure that it's really clear and I guess digitally able to be digested. And remind yourself that when you are designing that simple is best, there needs to be a certain amount of white space so that the things that you want to be punchy and to dominate and to like fulfill that hierarchy that we were talking about beforehand is able to sing. Use the same font all the way through. I teach undergrads most of the time, and for them I make a rule of it's one font, one size, one color all the way through, and they can use different types of techniques. I'm not going to make you guys do that because I know that you're adults and you're able to make decisions, unlike my 22-year-olds. But I guess really challenge yourself with that, a very Zen type of aesthetic, and it tends to come across nicer. And that's basically it on the graphics front. So as I said, I have a handful of URLs that I'll post for you guys to have a look at, and a couple of books that I find really helpful that I like to keep on my short low shelf for quick references when I'm not too sure what's happening in graphic design land to help me through to budget. But is there any quick questions around that you'd like to quickly answer now, or should we leave it to Slack later? All right, you're all good. Perfect. All right, so we are 7:05, so we've got about 25 minutes rest left for our session. We're going to jump into our breakout rooms now. Lisa, would you mind texting?
Just shot off to him now and he's setting it up for us.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah, so the main thing there is I think we are going to be today randomly allocated to rooms, but hopefully through talking on Slack we'll start to get some grouping of people who have similar areas of interest working together in the TUTE groups going forward. Kim's got a step ahead of us on his journey so far. Cool.
Amazing. Perfect. Do you want my job? You can just take this for the next 25 minutes.
Everyone started by now. It's due on Sunday.
I like it. I like it. All right. So we're going to do a quick little activity for the next 20 minutes. And I know that you're all at different stages of your design research journey. But this is an activity that I use for my honours students to get them to formulate the types of, I guess, issues that they're going to be dealing with. And it's the what sucks. So as I said beforehand, designers are used to solving problems. That's essentially what we do. But to make it more meaningful, I pose the question of what sucks because it's a really kind of Australian type of way to have a look at the things that we tolerate all the time, or the things that we know happen all the time, the things that don't have to be the way that they are. So to lead on from Michelle's question beforehand in financial services, what sucks? What sucks is going to a bank and lining up. We know that, but we tolerated it for a really long time. All of a sudden, internet banking comes along and things change. And you know, they're obviously moving faster and faster and beyond that, which is really interesting. So for this activity, I want you to have a look at the field that you're interested in and pose that question of what sucks and answer it. So take a few moments, get a piece of paper, write it down in the middle, and then we'll come back and we'll kind of frame it as a group.
Did I miss something?
Ah, welcome. I was wondering whether you were going to make it. Okay, just to
Yeah.
recap, grab a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And you may have already done this because it seems like you're a super organized fellow. The way that so as designers, we solve problems all the time. In this particular type of research project, it's your opportunity to ask yourself a really big kind of audacious question, and obviously narrow it down, but to give yourself an opportunity to question something that happens all the time that we take for granted. And for my honours students, I always use the idea around the question of what sucks. So what do we deal with all the time that actually really sucks and makes our life worse, but if we were to take the moment to redesign it, we could improve it. So I'll just use the example from Michelle's financial services. So what sucks is lining up at a bank and missing in the opening hours and all those types of things. And we tolerated that for 50 or 60 years or however long banks have been around for. And all of a sudden, internet banking comes along and it revolutionizes it. And what we're seeing now, particularly, is it you or me or whatever that app is that's that manages your banking for you outside of the bank, is revolutionizing that area. So grab a piece of paper, write down the what sucks, and have a look at your field that you're particularly interested in, and see if you can frame the question, your research question, in the what sucks, this is what sucks. And so once you get that question down, give you a moment. I want you to brain dump everything that you know about that area, everything around it. So if you write the question in the middle of the piece of paper, all the way around it, I want you to write what you know about that area. And some of these things might be, I know about it because I've worked in that area for 10 years. And so you pop that over to the side and we can flesh that out as part of your reflection part. You might also know about this area because you have young kids and you have to deal with these types of loopholes that make life really hard. Or you might know about, so that's kind of a lived experience. You might know about this area because you read this really, really interesting article in the New Yorker about it last week, and you just can't stop thinking about it, and it's driven some sort of inner passion for you. It might be because, I'm trying to think. I think it's kind of the big main ones. It's either a lived experience, it's a work experience, or it's something that's just driving you nuts. I guess conversely, if there's any kind of budding, enterprising souls out there, it's something that you see as an opportunity, either for yourself to overcome and improve people's lives, or a commercial reality in order to move into, or it's an area that you want to move into as part of this master's course of pivoting your professional career. Okay, we'll do it 1 more minute and then we'll come back together as a group. All right, who would like to share what they've done? You can hold it up to the screen or you can just talk about it with us. And the idea of this is to share, I guess, the areas that you're interested in and find out if anyone else has some ideas they can throw at you that might be able to spur you on.
I might go just because, again, I'm not really sure where to start. So I've gone through quite a wide range, and if anyone has any thoughts, I'd love to hear them. So I think that road safety for cyclists is pretty crappy still. Transparency on political sponsors and lobbying is pretty crappy. Lack of general tolerance and empathy between demographics in society, a lack of a kind of effective point of truth, our understanding or common understanding of domestic violence and or homelessness, lack of female narratives and role models, major parties refusing to agree and work together, a contemporary kind of universal code of etiquette or concept of kindness, the ability for people to discuss reasonably rather than become kind of dichotomy. And
so India, with the way that you kind of looked at it, you really looked at it as kind of this really broad, like what sucks in the world. How about in relation to your project? Like in the field that you're particularly interested in, which I think was leadership, is that right?
No,
sorry, I must have got you confused.
I think that was Karen and someone else.
That's right. What was the particular field that you were interested in exploring for your research project?
I don't know. That's
okay.
Kind of thought that was what we were doing. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. It was. I guess the questions you were asking were quite dispersed, and I guess that might be more where you're at the moment.
These are my like continents. Or yeah.
Okay, cool. Why don't you take us down to like? Do you have a look at just one that you were particularly, I guess, echoed more for you than others?
I don't think I'm really clear yet. Maybe can someone else go and I'll have a think about it?
Yeah, no worries. Kim?
So Karen and I had a chat earlier about the challenge of doing this in anticipation of a project that hasn't materialized yet. So, for example, I won't be doing the project part until January next year. Because to give a bit of context, so I'm currently doing service reform project at the Children's Court of Victoria, so using human-centered design for institutional reform.
Yeah.
I can get questions and do reflective practice within the context of my practice at the court, but I'm more interested in my own interests are more in education and learning design, or sustainability. So my question is more, how might we use design as a pedagogy for sustainable futures? So some things that suck, I think, is disconnect often between people and other people in a learning context. Often there's a disconnect, I think, between the academic and real world experience and wisdom of the world. So people aren't really aren't as motivated because they don't see the meaning in the learning. I think often there's an absence of co-learning between a teacher and a student.
Mm.
And so this hierarchical knowledge transmission doesn't really cultivate a culture of learning within. I'm just talking abstractly, you know, about what I think sucks often in the conventional education context.
Yeah, it's great.
And often I think that the hierarchical expert student model doesn't give students a sense of agency. They're inferior, the learner, the one who doesn't know. So my hypothesis is that design gives people a sense of agency because you can turn a challenge into an opportunity. And so design is being used now in education. That's the theory I want to move into. Without practicing, it's hard to get deeper into specifics, but I can see myself running a workshop with the school on how to use design as a learning tool to allow people to question their worldviews and their attitudes and their beliefs, but also to have agency as a way to take issues into their own hands. And the opportunities include working with schools and teachers, or with a non-profit organisation, or the university.
Okay, so from the point that you're at, which is really, really interesting in terms of the way that you're drilling in, what are the bits that you think that you don't know, or the assumptions that you're making in the questions that you're asking?
That design, human-centered design as a pedagogy might be confusing because I think project-based learning or concept-based learning or problem-based learning might be different names of a very similar thing. So there's an assumption that it's novel and interesting to educate. There's an assumption that I can find relevant projects that can enable me to reflect on.
Yep.
So there's a huge entrepreneurial, opportunistic dimension to all this. Right? I can speculate on a whole range of opportunities and ideas, but what materializes is a whole different thing.
Yeah, totally. How about the role of standardized education in what you're proposing?
Pardon?
How about the role of standardized education? You know, we do a whole bunch of standardized kind of testing and hoop jumping that we force students to project arbitrary drawing lines in the sand. How do you feel like that sits within what you're doing?
Yeah, that's relevant as well. The enforced constraints on teachers to design education for testing creates an environment where people are teaching to lift scores, creates a competitive school environment, creates anxiety among students, creates false learning environments in terms of how best to learn for a number. It's a whole range of problems relating to standardized education. How this is relevant, it could there's a collaborative, creative dimension to it that tries to break down the individual competitive nature of education to be more collaborative and connected. A whole range of questions that I can look at.
Yeah, cool. So I guess from the brainstorm that you've just done and all the questions that you've popped down afterwards, I guess my challenge to all of you is to have a look at them because they are based on a bunch of assumptions, and to find out where those assumptions come from. So whether it's because of your lived experience, whether it's from something that you've read, and pop those in there, perhaps use different types of colors to kind of identify that. And then conversely, over the top of that is being able to have a look at I've just lost my train of thought. It's terrible. So if you're having a look at the assumptions, have a look at the things that you don't know. And that's always really hard to figure out, particularly when you feel like you've just poured out your heart onto your onto the piece of paper. and I think it's, for me as a visual person, I find it really easy to be able to place it all in, I guess, physical spaces. So I can say, actually, there's this whole area over here around, the reason why I asked about standardization is because there's an economic imperative in the way that education is delivered and assessed and all those types of things. And I think that that's often at odds into the way that people work collaboratively and sustainability and all those types of things. So how is that kind of balanced in that type of area? So that I guess education as a business kind of needs to be considered. The task in itself, and I guess this is the bit kind of that's really uncomfortable about it, is that it is a really, I guess it's fleshing it all out and kind of making you, I guess kind of just vomit it all out onto the page to kind of just spread it all out, so that you can say, okay, so this is the big problem, but this is just the section I'm going to focus on. So you're aware of everything that's happening around it, but you're not attempting to solve it all, just a particular area. Does anyone else have one that they'd like to share? Is it Shaya?
Shay.
Shay.
Yeah. I guess the area that I'm interested in is loneliness and social isolation, particularly in the pre-hospital setting.
Yeah, great.
And what that looks like. So I guess if you talk about, what sucks that if in this world of connectedness that we still have people that are lonely and increasingly lonely and feeling socially isolated. So it's a huge, massive topic. So, but I think I want to, based on my work, focus on the pre-hospital setting and getting some idea about what's out there and what's currently being used to measure loneliness in that area. So yeah, that's kind of only where I'm at the moment.
Yeah.
I just sort of go, it's a huge problem, but I want to focus on that pre-hospital area.
Yeah, totally. I think what's really interesting about, all of the topics is that they are really interesting. They're topical at the moment. So there's heaps of things for you to have a wade through. And I can throw you some links to have a look at. Just off the top of my head, have you been in touch with the Health Transition Lab at RMIT?
Yes.
Yeah, great. I think Mark is quite embedded there.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So they have a couple of, I think, PhD students that are kind of looking around this connectivity in hospitals, which may or may not be interesting. But at least there's practices going on at the moment that you can relate to, and at least pick holes in what they're doing and decide why you wouldn't want to do something like that.
Yep. No, that sounds good.
Yeah, cool. Anyone else would like to share? Jim. Would you like to go, Jim?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jim. Sorry for being late earlier. I had some problems with the trains and I work for Transport. So, yeah, I just put some sort of scribbles together on the page, just around my key theme, which is what sucks in the context of design in the public service. And that could either be federal or state. And I've got things down here like evidence-based policy is set aside for short-term political gain. The perils of democracy itself, in that politicians have to pander to what's going to get them elected the next time rather than what could be better for the population in the long term. So that's sort of around the electoral process. And if you've ever worked for the public sector or especially in state government, there is actually the pain of the electoral cycle itself when so many things shut down and budgets aren't approved and decisions aren't made. And that really slows everything down to an absolute trickle. And that can be very frustrating and very stressful as well. It's really some of the elements of stress that design and design leaders have to deal with in the public service. It's this constant juggling of all these different roles and sort of decision making. And then it's those big personalities as well, those, the politicians who are in the end the people that make the decisions and sign off the projects and, give us the budgets. And that can be very far away from evidence-based policy. It can be all about ideology. It's basically, unfortunately, these days, it's a bit about sort of reality as well, and how ideologies try and make up their own reality as they go along. and how you have to deal with that, and how do you sort of stay reasonably sane in this type of situation. So
Yeah.
that's, yeah.
Great. That's really interesting, and it's something I think politically particularly at the moment seems to be on I guess the broader issue around things that people are grappling with the current leadership under wellness. So for you, I guess that area is really, really large. For you, what bit do you think you're going to zero in on and have a look at?
I think it's the bit that I'd like to zero in on is actually how do you stay resilient as a design leader? How do you deal with that? How do you keep coming back? How do you actually effectively make change? How do you manage to struggle through this process and actually deliver change in the end? So it's about resilience really in design leadership.
Yeah, interesting. I have a couple of examples that are coming to mind that I know of overseas, but I'll flick you the links of those so you can have a look at those case studies and see if they'll be of any help. All right, anyone else that would like to share before we wrap up tonight?
I had flicked some things on the chat. So it'd be good maybe just to get a feel for whether I'm barking up the right tree or not. But it sucks things where it sucks that it takes 4 months to leave a bank and sign up with a new one. It also sucks that you're not able to solve all banking queries via all digital mediums due to privacy laws and tech capability. It also sucks that it takes 30 or more years to pay off a mortgage when not, but now with financial wellbeing, i.e. the Royal Commission, via education is increasing. It also sucks that we aren't taught about money savviness at school, for example, saving versus credit cards, but also that it is improving with access to information, digital calculators and accountability within the sector.
Yeah, I think all the questions are actually really, really interesting. And yeah, it makes me feel a bit sad, but which area do you think you'll zero in on?
If I come back to my sort of street or neighbourhood view, I still think the sort of redundancy or the purposefulness, is that even a word, of the .com space versus the app or something else. I would like to somehow tie it into that. And if, for example, the sector is looking more into financial well-being, for example, is that something that is more dependent on one platform or medium than another? I think once I sort of hone in on the specific problem and potential opportunity or hypothesis, I think framing the question will be interesting for me because it's probably not something that I'm great at. Well, actually, I really suck at that, to be honest. So that's where I might need a lot of help.
Well, I think what's really interesting with what you're talking about in the particular industry is that back in the day, a community would probably identify a bank manager, and would have been part of your neighborhood. And if someone was experiencing hardship or they didn't know how to manage their finances or whatever, there actually would be someone that was almost that they had to be accountable to. They might know the bank manager, or they'd know that teller they'd visit every week getting more money out. And with that technology interface that came through, that anonymity is kind of manifested. And so I wonder whether a lot of the questions that you posted here on the chat channel, now and then I'm just scanning through it, has a technology kind of overlay onto it, which makes us as designers really exciting because there's graphics to design and there's service design to kind of lay out. But as a result of these, I guess, beautiful narratives that we're putting out there, what's the thing that we've done away with of that kind of interpersonal analog element to it that may have pushed into the well-being element, which is particularly interesting as well. Jim just posted a really interesting question for you, Michelle, around digital inclusion versus exclusion. which is particularly interesting, and the willingness of people to trust the technology and therefore engage on it. That's cool. All right, so what I'm going to do now, a couple of you haven't shared tonight. So if you would like to flick me your idea or your area, then I can kind of go away and have a look at some of the examples or case studies that I know of and flick them through to you and help you flesh out, I guess, what you're having a look at that way. And for those of you that are leaping ahead in leaps and bounds, you potentially will be, I guess, the check-in will be is not as necessary for you. Does anyone have any last questions they'd like to send out? Okay. Then that's it for our first session. Thank you so much for making the time. I know Wednesday nights are not great, but it's great to chat to you all, and I really look forward to working with you over the next, we've got 6 sessions together and 10-ish weeks, I guess, to pull this together. So tomorrow, on Friday morning, I'm going to be on Slack to help with any particular types of issues, but between now and then, I'd really love to either email you or Slack private message you some more ideas that I may have had around your research project, or if you wanted to send some more, that would be really great. So I'm just going to put on my email address in case you wanted to get in touch with me. Alternatively, the Slack, and I will endeavour to check that. So have a lovely night, everyone. It's I'm in Castlemaine at the moment, and it's just beautiful outside. It's a shame to be sitting inside, but I hope you guys all have a lovely evening. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so I actually have, I have a sample of people across different levels. So why don't we start with people who are at a little bit more clarity, and then we'll go back and sort of help see how we can achieve that for the other group. And I'm just quickly pulling up my notes again because, right. So the activity.
Lisa, sorry, Lisa, could I just jump in for a second as well? And maybe I've missed something here, but I've looked at those 2 posters, and they've both taken the same approach, essentially of saying, here's the research question and here's 3 other types of things that are similar to what I want to do or the approach. And I just don't know if it's in the example, but it's not anywhere in the packages in terms of saying, this is how you should present your research poster. Sorry, I'm in a campsite and there's a kitchen next to me. I just wanted to, if it's possible for us to get a bit more of an explanation of, given that we haven't done the literature review yet, we're basically projecting into a future state that could be a year away for us. And also, without having done the literature review, the research poster is basically saying, well, at least the 2 examples, there's been some literature review, because otherwise how did they come up with those 3 examples? And so I'm just a bit sort of confused as to what the point, you might be the audience of the research poster, but what's the point of the research poster?
Yep. So, okay. So what we're looking for in terms of the research poster purpose, that is, so I said there's 3 elements on there. There's your personal journey, and the one on Canvas is my very unpretty graphic version that, whilst telling a good story, doesn't look nice and could have less words, I dare say. Okay, but what the purpose of it is for the second point, it's all about focusing your thinking and being able to communicate sharply an idea, so we understand what your domain is to set up through the next 2 tasks, which are actually, I think, 40 and 50% respectively. This one's only 10%, and it really just frames up how we carry forward through the rest of the subject. Those example things, so there's 3 elements to the second one, which the 2 examples Marius provided you, which was the research question poster. That research question poster is probably really around, they are probably not lit review, but more what we call jumping off or inspiration points. So people are beginning to look for, as I'm zooming in on the things I wanted to do, what are the things that have inspired me or made me query about this? Oh, there was that case study that IDEO did that really has kind of been an inspirational jumping off point for me. So I'm going to capture that. What we've done this time is we've actually suggested keywords. So you'll see that, so there's potentially been some slight iteration and tweaking of this as it's gone through from year to year. So for instance, the year I did it, we didn't have to do the visualization of our research questions. That was a new one. So it's just kind of possibly they've iterated again and said what is more valuable as what is more valuable as a jumping off point is going to be your keywords that you might want to start searching on around those questions. But if there is a case study that also is that inspired me, again, it's all about the jumping off point into the next task rather than actually having pulled out key examples from a lit review.
Okay, thank you.
It's all right. So I am just looking now at people who, so Michelle is actually not in this group, and Kim's jumped out, who had some clarity. So who feels like, so Priyanka, where did you say you felt you were? Were you at kind of city view, or were you still up at continent view?
I think I'm somewhere in between city and street.
Okay.
So
why don't you talk us through where you're at?
My area of interest is lies in customer experiences, and I want to build something within the retail sector for encouraging sustainable customer behaviors.
Yeah.
Something that would dictate better purchase decisions with respect to sustainability. So I want to base my research on these three. It's like a three-pronged research question.
Yep.
Which goes something like, how could design help the retail sector encourage sustainable behavior by creating rewarding experiences or innovative services? So that's the space that I want to look at.
I'd say you're pretty close to Street View. You're definitely in neighbourhood view and probably pretty close to Street View. You're kind of, but so yes, we can probably get a little bit more specificity around those questions, but you've got a really clear general domain in terms of customer experience and rewards around sustainability, but then you're looking specifically about how design can use rewards to guide customer choice or selection around sustainability. So that to me feels like we're actually getting pretty close to Street View for you there.
I'm sorry.
Go on.
But you said something. Okay. So the way I'm basing it to flesh my idea out is loyalty should be rewarded instead of it being something that is mandatory. So brands got to build loyalty within customers. So that is one part that I'm looking at. And if it is a rewarding experience for something that brings in some positive changes in the environment, then that is like maybe like setting up a shared value within that ecosystem of retail. That's something that I'm really interested in. Hope I'm making sense. I don't know, because it's just too bizarre at the moment.
Yeah. No, that's fine. It feels like you've got a really clear domain area that you want to go into, and you know the space of the neighbourhood, but you just haven't kind of landed the specificity. So so as we guide you through the next activity, we're going to zoom in on that. Steve and Stephen have both said that you really feel like you're up at Continent View and you haven't got clarity in there yet. Can I ask, are both of you doing, when are you doing your project? Are you doing it first semester or second semester this year, or are you doing it in subsequent years?
I'm doing mine in the first semester.
Okay, so we're going to get you to clarity real quick to zoom in.
Yeah,
you're kicking off in about 8 weeks' time.
Yeah, I just finished leadership last semester, and from that, it sort of led me in directions that I wanted to pursue. So I've spent the last few weeks just reading about a whole bunch of different design theories and philosophies. And it sort of widened that area that I was originally looking at in leadership. So now I just need to refocus that down at the moment.
Okay, so that actually sounds like that's pretty good. You're probably actually getting pretty much into City View there rather than Continent. Yeah. It probably just doesn't feel like it because you've gone wide again.
Yeah, that's probably right. Like I've just uploaded an image to the chat, and that's sort of the problem space that I've been exploring.
Yep.
Yeah, it does feel like continent view, but maybe I'm further along than that.
Cool. So I'm downloading that now, but because of my internet, so this is Australia's world-class leading internet. I'm not on NBN yet, but I'm widely assured that probably won't help matters. So we go. That is now. There we go. Open file. Okay. Right, there's a lot of information there that I'm not going to go through right this very moment, but we can kind of slack back around on that later in the week, hey? What we're going to do now is this is a bit of an activity to just help people get to clarity. So if you are at the moment feeling really vague and all the way up at continent view, let's see if at least by the end of today we can get you to city view. If you're at city view, can I get you to neighbourhood or street view? And if you're at neighbourhood view, let's really sharpen up on street view. So the activity is to get a large piece of paper, anything, and now this is a prompt, if you like, to get through, and it's a question that asks what sucks. So usually when we want to explore it, because there's something in there that's that real irritant, it's that thing that's the thing that's bugging me that we need to do better, that needs to be fixed, that needs to change. The catalyst for wanting that to be that is because something now kind of sucks. So it's either overlooked and it's really bugging you, or it's something that's kind of epic and it actually smacks you in the face. So if you kind of write down the thing that sucks for you, that's kind of made you go, okay, this is why I want to probe into that, and jot down what sucks there. And then once we go down, I want you to now, for that thing that really is bugging you, that irritant, and this is kind of, you know, that analogy about that irritant or that grain of grit in an oyster around which a pearl is formed. What we're going to do now is start circling around that irritant to see if we can start to build out that pearl of wisdom. And I think I'm probably stretching the analogy there. So the first thing is to go down. I just want brain dump everything you know about that area. So that's the problem space. And it looks like what Steve's already done is actually flesh out a lot around what we know around the problem space, which is great. So all the things that you think are the problem now, and if there's things like, I don't know why that's the problem, that's going to be the second stage where we'll go, what don't I know that I feel like we should understand here? Why is this happening that I can't explain? So it's kind of brain dumping down what you don't know yet. So write down any gaps, drawing attention to any assumptions that might be in there. So I think people do this because, I think this exists because, I think that happened because. And Karen, I'm very aware for you that you're not going to go straight into project, so that yours is you know, not going to be as refined as some of the other people here, and that is completely fine. There's still a lot of value in this learning exercise, because what you've heard from Steve, and certainly was the case for me as well when I was going through, a lot of the thinking that I did through the course, through things like leadership, actually came out of the irritant. So actually really understanding that problem space that you want to explore will be beneficial not just to your project, but the whole way you kind of then navigate through this course. And it's also going to give you some skills as we talk about how to do lit reviews and write up research plans that will also hopefully come in handy throughout. But I also appreciate this first step's probably we're going to punish you a little bit more in your thinking, but that's okay because it's only worth 10% and we're really assessing on how well you can tell that story and have zoomed in on a thing. It doesn't have to be the thing, it's iteration 1. It's not your final proposal. So, you know, just remember what is and isn't actually hanging off this first task.
So I guess the other thing as well though, Lisa, is if you look at like, say, the layers of design where you go, okay, I'll design a bike, I'll design the urban planning for bike pathways, then I'll design the policies for trying to get people to use more bikes, and then the law changes and then you have to then tell everyone they've all got to ride their bikes. So I would like what I do for the rest of my career to be at that level. And so I don't want to go to the street level on a particular like industry. I want it to be more in a area of, say, for instance, there's 5 people in the room and none of them agree with each other. And my job is to get them or design some level of process that gets them to have facilitates a conversation. And design does that. It creates that dialogue. But I guess what I want to look at within that environment is how do we perceive risk in the same way, and how do we understand right and wrong together? And those are probably the things that I don't, and that's where you just asked me what sucks. And I'm like, well, I think what sucks is people don't even try to see things from other people's perspectives. Mm-hmm. That's what sucks for me. And I'm like, and when you can get people to do that, you're like, we're winning. And I would like to work out how to design that rather than it being an intuitive thing that some people can do and some people can't.
So you're speaking to my heart now, because my project for this was what I call a meta project. It was about designing design. It actually wasn't about designing for an industry or designing for a solution. And that is valid. In fact, design research is how can design do things better or operate in spaces better. So what you're talking there is about, and it feels to me that there's something in strategic design that comes at the alignment and implementation. And that's a lot of what my PhD is kind of in looking at a very, as a service designer, I honestly once in my life designed a service. The rest of my career, I've only ever redesigned services, because services evolve and they're a bit rubbish, and then they bring in the service designers to redesign them, which means you have an entire ecosystem that needs to change. And I realised the biggest barrier to service design being executed quite well was how we work with change management and organisations. So yeah, that is, I did what the individual's experience of transition was in my master's, and in my PhD I'm looking at what organisational transition looks like as design as the prompt and intervention. So that's completely valid to say that we have this general problem that is around this common understanding about building alignment, about getting implementation working effectively together, multiple stakeholders with different things. What role could or might design play in facilitating better engagement around those kind of implementation issues? If I hear back and tell me if I'm reading this wrong, because that's a very valid city and neighbourhood to zoom into, is how can design solve a problem of how we work together, and not trying to solve the entire way that the entire organisation works together, but in this one moment, at whatever that moment might be, how might human-centred design approaches help? And design actually has a really good toolkit for that is a good, fertile place to explore.
Yeah, okay. So what role may human-centred design play in facilitating how stakeholders work together in high-risk community-based situations? Like, for instance, how would we all come together and work out how we make sure that the burning practices of the CFA are now right, given no one agrees right now?
Yeah. Excellent. That's a small one to take on. Excellent. Yeah, there's a really fertile ground. I don't think so I don't know if I'm going to say kill certain sections of the media is actually a way to solve that problem, but I don't think that's quite a permissible space that design gets to play in. But what you've said there is a really good motherhood statement, and you've said now I zoom in about how do we get people to have a common view of risk or common understanding of risk. And this is one element. So what you're doing now is you're going to the next level, that it's a specific question chunked down underneath that domain heading. And again, going through what sucks about that, what don't I know about that design could help uncover, that we could uncover through research. And you've got a whole year through other subjects to uncover this more as well. So you've actually gotten the ability to go really rich there, which is awesome.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lisa.
Now, I haven't heard from Catherine and Stephen, so I don't know if either you're at a point, and don't feel the pressure in here. If you would rather take this over to Slack to have a conversation there, that's fine. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm giving you the opportunity, if you want to throw out to the room or to me, a real-time conversation about where you're sitting with your what sucks and what do I know about this thing that's the irritant, and what don't I know, because that will really help us focus in then on what your questions are going to be.
So listening to all of everyone's feedback and listening to everyone's ideas, in addition to coming out with some things that suck, I've formed what possibly might be a research question, which is, can human-centered design change online rage culture?
Okay.
Because I guess without really knowing where to classify it in terms of continental or street view or any of that, I'm interested in looking at how design, let's say in one respect, firstly, how the role that design has played, for example, in creating rage culture, online rage culture, and what role design can play in altering that trajectory. So to me, that seems like a really very broad, vague kind of question.
Yeah, that is a very big question. It feels like you've got a really clear neighbourhood there. What we're going to do in terms of a 12-week project is probably encourage you to pick one slice. So even in my PhD, I'm not looking at how an entire organisation transforms, although that's the field I'm researching in. I'm picking the specific slice that goes through how do emotion and people's sense of identity actually help or hinder them to engage with the change process, under the learning and observations that at the conditions that most create the need for change also rob humans of their capacity to engage with change, and what critical design interventions could help shift that. So again, I haven't looked at how I change an entire organisation. I've picked one moment of truth slice in there to dive into. Already having laughs with my supervisors that we've lined up at least 2, if not 3 postdoctoral fellowships around some other slices in there that we had to discard that are also fertile territory. So, you know, I'm playing one slice at the moment. I think you've got a really good, strong neighbourhood there. I think that without knowing what your background is, you're speaking with a real belief and passion, and that's what I've heard from everyone so far, which is excellent. If you can have a thing that you know are a little bit obsessed in, it's much easier to get through the whole research process. So what we might do is I'd encourage you, rather than trying to zoom into make it smaller, I think your neighbourhood is solid. Just pick the slice that you want to take through that neighbourhood now. And
you flesh that out just a little bit, what you mean? Because to me, when you say the slice, you're talking about the slice of the neighbourhood. So perhaps that might be even one house view or a small cul-de-sac view.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so for me, when I use the example of, I said my city is Milan, my neighbourhood is Isola, and the slice I'm going to take of that neighbourhood, even though there's a whole lot going on there is a fresh produce market that happens there. It's like, what if I took the food trail and the way the whole community and neighbourhood engages with this neighbourhood initiative? What does that tell me about the whole neighbourhood? But I'm not looking about their bars, and I'm not looking about their shops, and I'm not looking about their work habits, but I'm learning a little bit about them just by looking about the food.
So in essence,
not the food in one house, it's how that food travels through the whole neighbourhood and how the whole neighbourhood engages with fresh produce. Well, those people are the financial sector workers up the eastern end of the neighbourhood, and they want ready meals and they don't want fresh produce. They have to prepare themselves. But this is interesting, in this other part of the neighbourhood, people are very much in the slow food movement. And I'm suddenly understanding the dynamics of this neighbourhood much more just through the food slice.
So in essence, I'm taking that idea, I might slice that down to just Twitter, for example. Is that what you mean?
That could be one way, or it could be rage around specific issues. It could be, I mean, Twitter, if you're going to do rage culture, I think you'd have, you know, Twitter is definitely a big part of that, but there's all kinds of social engineering that goes along multi-platform. So you may pick one piece of social engineering that goes multi-platform. So how does meme culture actually translate across Facebook, Twitter, that actually rewards and fans engagement through outrage? But now I have this outrage culture, and how do I deal with it? I'm not enough expert in there. There could be other threads. So again, try and think of it as in the slice. It's rather than picking one building in that neighbourhood, what's one thing that if I explore that one theme, it will shed some little insights into the whole neighbourhood for me. Okay, Catherine, how are you feeling with all of this?
I'm pretty good. I'm got this subject, strategy, my elective, and then my final project. So I'm, 2/3 of the way through. So I'm pretty confident. But I was just sitting here trying to write out a more kind of sentence or a question that makes sense. But basically what I'm going to look at is, I work in local government. Mm-hmm. What I'm really interested in is how, or the role that design can play in creating efficient services. Hang on, sorry, let me take a step back. So the role that design can play in reviewing and redesigning services in a rate capping environment. And what I mean by that is, so I work at the City of Casey, so anybody who lives and works in Victoria may know of us quite well at the moment. We're not as famous as probably one of the other local governments in Victoria at the moment whose CEO is at a Royal Commission, but we're pretty close. And so that in the last kind of 6 or 8 weeks has added another layer of complexity around corruption and doing the best for the community and all of that kind of stuff. And I haven't quite kind of figured out how I'm going to break that down, if it will fit into it at all or not. But definitely wanting to look at design as a tool for collaboration.
Yep. So that's a really good summary there. I think design as tool for collaboration specifically, and you're talking about rate capping, so you've got a severe resource constraint. It's absolutely inelastic in terms of the resource you're getting allocated to you. There's zero capacity to go and acquire new customers to grow your base. Your base is your base and it's capped and that's it. So within an environment of extreme constraint, that collaboration is quite different to what it might look like in something that Priyanka is doing in retail, where you have capacities to grow your base or to go into adjacent markets, and all of the possibilities that might be available for the sort of field that she's researching in just don't exist for you. Which is probably much more familiar to a lot of people. But the constraint is quite severe in a rate capping environment. So that's really good context, but I wouldn't put it in your research question. I think when you talked about tool for collaboration, about creating, redesigning services to make better use of the very constricted resources that you've got, is probably a really good way. You're going to, I think, be a little bit similar. That's a really big field. And now you can pick one house and one thing to dive into, which might be, delivery of homeless support or library services or young parent support or whatever your thing is. That's, there's a lot of fertile areas. Or the other thing you could do is, again, what is that common thread that if I picked one slice, that if I explored that one slice, that would illuminate the neighbourhood? I think that there's actually a really strong crossover with what Karen was talking about in hers, in terms of how we get people aligned, understanding common values, what's right, what's wrong. There's kind of that sense of how, when you talk about a tool for collaboration, I think that you and Karen are potentially playing in the same space a little bit there, which is almost meta about how design engages and what it can contribute versus the actual solution. Although I feel like from what you're playing back to me, you want to be a little bit more grounded in solving the problem. So you could be opposite sides of the same coin there.
Yeah, that Karen, she's pretty clever. So I had to rewrite my question so that I didn't copy her exactly.
She spoke first, so she owns it. That's the way
exactly
it works.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so I think for you, the challenge is going through that, what sucks, what do I know, what don't I know, and then decide if you want to take a particular piece of that puzzle and just solve that one piece, or if you want to take the slice, which is the thread that weaving through, like the food trail through a neighbourhood tells us about how people engage and live and inhabit that neighbourhood. You've got a lot of time to work through this. For the purpose of this exercise, I would say just pick one, explore it for this task. No matter what you do with your lit search, I think that's going to yield benefits to you. And this, you've got a long time before you actually have to do this project. So I'd encourage you to just pick one, run with it for 8 weeks, and then see what did I learn through that, and is this something I could then commit to or not, because you actually have a year to refine it before you then go into your project. And you can explore it through leaders and other things that you do as well.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
So was there any more questions for me today? Because I'm aware that I've gone over time. Okay. Now we'll post up the exact times onto Slack, but we've agreed that normally we're sort of saying Fridays and Mondays are good days for either Juliet or myself to be on Slack to be answering questions, so you're never waiting more than a couple of days for an answer. However, because this assignment is due Sunday, Juliet's going to be on Friday and I will be on Sunday morning, so that you can flesh through it. If you find you're still stuck Sunday morning and you want someone to help me understand this, I'll be around for a few hours there in the morning to answer any questions live for you, or if you've got any questions through Saturday, you can sort of load them up Saturday evening, knowing by Sunday morning you'll get some feedback. Alrighty, otherwise, for, like I said, the thing that we haven't talked about for the research plan, this research plan is not the thing you're committing to. That's assessment task 3. This is literally your chance to be speculative and be adventurous. How might I answer that question? Would I do all surveys? Would I do all observation? Would I actually create some workshop probe where I got people to play with Lego? And what might that look? Or a card deck, maybe Cards for Humanity, something like that. What does that tell me about answering the things I need to understand? Do I do it all online? Do I do it anonymously? Do I actually go and do personal interviews with people? Think of different ways and try 2 really different ways for how you might answer those questions. Yeah, there's nothing that you're committing to there. This is about the lower, that third piece is about the lowest stakes piece of work you will do, because all we're seeing is, can you think of ways you might answer a question? That way, actual approach is nothing you're committed to, and it locks you into nothing.
Lisa, I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit to that the 2A3 research plan scenarios and what exactly, why there's 2 and how exactly.
Yeah, so the 2 is really important because people can get locked into their first idea, and that often blocks out the best idea, and you lock out a lot of good ideas. So we're saying the first one might be, okay, I'm going to do what I always do, which is observation and contextual inquiry, and this is where the users are, and this is where I'll find them, and this is how I'll engage with them, and this is the probe that I'll put in there to learn the thing I need to learn. It's like, great, that's one plan. Throw things right up in the air. What if that was not available to you? How else might you answer this question? Okay, that's really interesting. So we're just encouraging you in this one to say, can I stretch my brain enough to think of 2 different ways that I could get answers to those questions? And if you are able to do that, ace. You actually have assessment task 3 before you write up your actual plan, and that's the one that for particular people going into this year to research project, again, you're not completely locked into it, but you're kind of, you're channeling down a direction in assessment task 3. Assessment task 1 is all about, can I think of different ways of answering those questions and show that there's a solid plan of each. That's all we need.
I just want to mention that I'm just starting the MDF program, and this is my very first unit. So I think my research project is still a bit away.
It's a long way off, but that's okay because you get to explore these themes, and you may find that in 18 months or 2 years' time when you come to do it, it looks completely different. I have the very first poster I did for my very first subject of the MDF, and I dug it up last year as part of my PhD reflection on practice, and I laughed about how different what I thought I was going to do ended up being what I was doing, even by the time I did my final research project 2 years later. So don't be afraid with that. This is really for you, particularly about learning about the learning and learning how to do referencing and lit reviews and all the rest of it. It's probably really good knowledge for the whole course. And welcome aboard, by the way. Alrighty. So we have lost Karen, who at other camping grounds has probably been called away to other business. If there's no more burning questions, I might call this a day, and then we'll chat on Slack in the next few days.
One other thing, any of the examples that have been shared to the chat, for some reason I've not been able to see them through the chat. I know that some of them were posted on the Slack channel, but I think, Stephen, you had also something that you had uploaded that I couldn't see on the chat. If you could upload that, maybe we can agree that we should always upload things to the Slack so they're always available to whoever might see them or need to see them.
Certainly, although when people are doing personal work, we always say that we respect their control over their personal work. So if you're happy to share that on Slack, that would be great. Steve, if you feel like that's something that you're not ready to share on Slack, that's of course 100% your control, but that
everything's got asterisks, as in it's in draft.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, for any time people are sharing their personal work on Slack, we just, you know, observe that, respect about their control of what that work is. Because it's raw, it's draft, it's not polished. And if anyone, you know, kind of tried to judge us on that, we might not be comfortable. It's a safe working think space.
Yeah, after so long in design, it really doesn't matter anymore.
Alrighty, well, it's been lovely to meet you this evening, and I'm really looking forward to how we go through the next few phases of this. I think it's going to be a really interesting group, certainly from what you've been talking about tonight.
Thanks, Lisa.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks very much.